Thank you so much for investing your time with us today. I'm the facilitator for this session. I'm Taro Mimura. I'm a partner at McKinsey's Tokyo office. And for this session, we have an amazing panel on the theme of scaling up sustainable development through startups. Our goal of the session is that whatever your role is in this industry, that you will come away with something, a new idea, fresh perspective, new strategy, something you can apply to be more successful in your investment strategy. So here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect. First, I'll take a few moments to introduce each of the panelists and tell a little bit about their background. Then I'll kick off the conversation asking questions that draw out some of the high-level themes and trends we should be thinking about. And then in the second half of our time today, so the remaining 30 minutes, we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask specific questions that you may have for any specific market and new investment opportunities. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them via Zoom chat, and we will pick up the questions from there. Sounds good? Is there any questions? Great. So let's get started with the panel discussions. So as you can see on the screen, we have 6 amazing panelists joining us today. Let me introduce one by one. From Indonesia, we have Professor Bambang. He is the former Minister of Finance, Minister of National Development Planning, and Minister of Research and Technology. From Malaysia, we have Rafiza. She is the Group CEO of Cradle Fund, which mainly focuses on early stage funding to innovate and aspire local entrepreneurs. From the Philippines, we have Dr. Paco. He is the founder and chairman of Nara Venture Capital, Zepto Education, and StratPoint Technologies. From Thailand, we have Dr. Punarj, going with the name of Pak, so I'll be calling him Pak today. He is the executive director of National Innovation Agency of Thailand. From Bangladesh, we have Karim. He is the founder and CEO of Technohaven Company, which has been serving the South Asian nations as a leader in software and IT services. And last but not least, we have Hara-san from JICA. Thank you all for joining. We're sure that the next hour will be a very exciting one. So maybe without further ado, let me kick off the conversation by me asking questions to each of the panelists. And while respective panelists provide his or her answers, please also others, feel free to jump in and add comments if any. Maybe I ask this first question to Hara-san to kick us off. So Hara-san, thank you for the speech at the beginning. But what does JICA expect to achieve as a result of supporting the startups from these 5 countries?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just let me give you some backgrounds why we started this program and what we expect. JICA, as a Japanese government agency, has supported a number of Japanese companies, especially the Japanese small and medium enterprises, to do their business and expand their business in developing countries with the aim of tackling the socioeconomic issues, solving the socioeconomic issues by their business. In the middle of these drastic changes in the social system caused by COVID-19, our interest to deepen our contribution to SDGs, we also believe that the collaboration with the local startups and scaling up their innovative business is also very effective and impactful. So we would like to carry out this initiative as part of Ninja program, as I said earlier, Next Innovation with Japan. Being JICA as a catalyst, we would like to provide a place for co-creation among the local startups in their respective developing countries and to the Japanese counterpart companies as well as investors. we would like to provide such a kind of a forum of interactions between Japan and a number of countries. Through this Ninja Accelerator program, the most promising 15 startups, which were selected from more than 200 applicants. I very much appreciate the number of significant applications and interest into this program. Those 15 companies have been working hard with the McKinsey team with these last few months, trying to scale up their business plan. During the next demo day, part 2, on the January 27th, diverse possibilities of collaboration will be presented by the 15 startups, and we are looking forward to seeing the creation of new core values for startups and diversity in this business to contribute to the SDGs. Let me add one more thing. Earlier, I said JICA being a catalyst. In the chemistry, catalyst is used as something that doesn't change, but that causes changes to some other elements. But I believe that JICA also needs to change itself from a government-oriented agency that can be labeled as official, bureaucratic, and sometimes or many times sluggish in decision-making, to a more open, business-like, and agile partner with the diverse stakeholders, especially in the private sector and startups. This is not an easy task, but worth trying. So this is why we started this program and what we expect, not only for the startups in the developing countries, but to make a kind of a change ourselves as a result of this program. I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Hara-san. By the way, Hara-san, you've been working on this project since last year. What's your thoughts so far working with the startups, exciting entrepreneurs, energetic entrepreneurs in the region? What's been exciting?
Yeah, I know that many of the participants into this program, especially the 15 companies, as well as the mentors and the guys joining for this for the acceleration program, have spent quite a long time and quite a lot of energy, day and night, and even over the weekends. So we are very much excited to see the good outcomes. And maybe on the day 2, demo day 2, we will have a very fruitful presentations by the participants. And of course, we would like to see as I said, connect the Japanese business as well as investors with those startups, so that we can make real changes, not only in those partner countries, but also in Japan as well.
Thank you so much, Hara-san. So maybe I shift the questions to our great panelists from the region. Maybe I start off from Indonesia. So Professor Bambang, I personally have been have worked in investment funds, investing in Asian startups actually, and Indonesia I think has been one of the role models in the region, in Asia. So it has received, lion's share of funds invested in startups in Southeast Asia. What really has made Indonesia a great startup hub in the region? And what are the lessons that other countries can learn from to further enhance their startup ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you, Taro. I think I would say the first main factor would be our dynamic and attractive market. Why it's called dynamic and attractive? I mean, first of all, of course, the size of the economy itself, with the GDP now more than $1 trillion, 270 million population, and more importantly, the number of the so-called the middle class has been rising close to 100 million right now. Currently, maybe around 85 million people. And then our income per capita is also still growing. Currently, we are around $4,000 per capita, but we have, I think, a big opportunity to get out of the lower middle income up to going to the upper middle income, hopefully after this pandemic. And then, of course, our younger population. Indonesia now experiencing so-called demographic bonus or demographic dividend, with the majority of the people at the so-called productive age. And you know, the millennial, the younger generation are the generation that now really look for the startup. And the reason why startup has been, I think, quite popular in Indonesia is because the younger generation trying to set up their own business, and they are very much familiar with the digital technology. And don't forget, Indonesia has almost 100% penetration of cell phone to the whole population, as well as, I think, quite high proportion of the cell phone user also using internet. And then out of our 74,000 villages all over the country, currently around 65,000 of them already connected with the internet. With this kind of connection, and then of course, the eagerness from the younger generation to deal with the digital technology, that's the reason why startup in Indonesia has been rising. And if we look around of the startup in Indonesia, there are three most popular business for Indonesian startup. Number one is fintech, and then almost the same is e-commerce, and also quite interestingly, education. So those three have been kind of the sectors in which Indonesian younger generation trying to build their startup. And last but not least, of course, the government support, and of course, private sector support. At the end of the day, we need support from variety of parties in order to promote more startup and trying to bring them into unicorn, decacorn, and of course, trying to make them bigger companies. In Indonesia, government or the president just launched the so-called Merah Putih Fund. Merah Putih means red and white fund that is intended to create new unicorns in Indonesia. So it's more like, you know, maybe it's more than venture capital. It's close to private equity. And then other than the government, the big companies, big conglomerates, also have their own version of so-called angel investors, incubators, as well as their private equity and venture capital dealing with the startup. So I think that's the reason why, as you mentioned rightly, that Indonesia already received, I think, quite a lot support in terms of funding for the existing and also the incoming startup.
Thank you, Professor Bambang. My key takeaway was that it has a large population, rising middle class, younger population who are digital savvy, but there's also been a strong government support to endorse those startups and business building. Speaking of the startup hub in Asia, maybe I shift my question to Rafiza from Malaysia. Similar to Indonesia, right? We also see quite a few large startups who have scaled up themselves in Malaysia, like you have Grab, you have CoinGetGo, BigPay. What have been the main enablers for such scale-ups in Malaysia, and particularly what was the role of the government in accelerating startups? Has there been anything unique to your market?
Yep, thank you very much. Similar to what's happening in Indonesia, as what was mentioned by Professor Bambang, but of course we are in a much smaller scale because of the population. There's been a number of similarities with Indonesia: young population, high internet penetration, and recently the government introduced the digital blueprint to further accelerate the digitalization, the digital economy in Malaysia. Now, and one of the, the reason of why Malaysia has been able to scale up some of our, startups is because of the diversity of our population in Malaysia. We've been able to work very closely, and they've been able to scale. So they use like Malaysia as a test bed, as a launch pad, to test because it's probably cheaper, safer, etc. And then they're able to scale regionally to our neighboring countries, given the diversity of our population, where we can, cater to different languages. So that is one, I would suppose, unique proposition that, that we have in Malaysia. Secondly, again, similar to Indonesia, Malaysia government, working very closely with the private sector, has been providing huge support. Give an example, Cradle Fund. We are a government agency under the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation in Malaysia. We've been around since 2003, and we've been providing funding with respect to, in the form of grant mainly, to early stage startups, because this is the area where private sector will probably be a little bit more reluctant. Private sector tends to put in investment once they are a little bit more established. And we know that because of that, we want to spur innovation, and especially with respect to sustainability, sustainable startups, as our sort of main topic for today. Because private VCs, they tend to be a lot more attracted to startups that can have high valuations, where they can exit, in 5 times, 7 times, etc., etc. But startups that are in the sustainability area, they play a balance of more developmental role, addressing sustainable problem statements, which may not necessarily provides a high valuation. So this is where the government, we have more than 7 agencies that provides funding in various forms. Ourselves, we have grants. We have other sister agency that provides in the form of equity, debt venture, private equity, and etc., to really push the developmental role, especially with respect to innovation and technology investments. That's number one. Recently, the government, through the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, we've launched a 10-year startup ecosystem roadmap, where we target to bring ourselves under the ecosystem ranking, currently number 47. We have a target of being on the top 20 by 2030. And among others, in the startup ecosystem roadmap, where we will be working very closely with all various stakeholders, including the private sector, we have a target of creation new 5,000 startups by 2025, and 5 unicorns as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of push, and of course, this is all also arising from market demand. So it's not just a push from the government, because there is a market demand for it, and so we have various support and working with various stakeholders. Thank you.
Afiza, I mean, what you just described is super aspirational. I'm just keen to understand, of that 10-year roadmap, what are the big initiatives that will really drive the growth for the startups in Malaysia? Okay,
so we have 5 various pillars. So the first one is funding. We want to attract more private sector, government working together. The second is talent. So we want to create more talent in the technology, STEM related, sector. Regulatory, what we notice is that a lot of the startups, the reason why they face challenges to scale up is due to regulatory challenges. And so those are some of the, things that we're looking at. Market access, and then the other one is the ecosystem. So these are the 5 pillars that, we want to really, we have specific targets, we have specific interventions that we want to create a more conducive and robust ecosystem for all the startups to flourish. Yeah.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
maybe I ask question to regarding Thailand then. Pak, so my question is Thailand and Japan have had such a long relationship, both private sector and government. My question would be, how does its close relationship with Japan help Thailand create, better and sustainable startup ecosystem, which would be especially an enabler to achieve, green economy goals? How can relationship with Japan accelerate that?
Thank you. I would like to start from the national policy regarding to so-called the new economy. In Thailand, we use these terms, bio-circular and green, so-called BCG economy. So in that sense, green economy is part of a bigger picture regarding to BCG. So in that sense, you can draw it down into specific relationships starting from government to government. We work very closely with NEDO, New Energy Development Organization, which equivalent to National Innovation Agency in Thailand. We support private sectors to develop innovation projects. We're starting from a joint project between Kairatsu in Japan, company like Toray, Mitsubishi, or other big companies in Japan, mainly in BCG. Then we draw it down into startups because our so-called government partner in Japan have a similar platform. Starting with, I think 5 years ago, we start to work, expand our work from corporate to corporate, or maybe medium to large companies, into startups, particularly in technology-oriented startup, not particularly focused on digital. That's maybe differ from Indonesia, Malaysia, or Singapore. That's mainly start their own startup ecosystem from digital transformation. While the relationship between Thailand and Japan, we mainly focus from bio-circular and green, which take longer time. But to some extent, for the past 3 or 4 years, startup ecosystem in Thailand started to evolve in a very unique way into specific, I would say, element. The first one, the roles of large national conglomerate. You can see that we have a wide range of transformation from investment that mainly concentrate on telco. We only have 3 telco in the past. They expanded into a banking sector. Now telco represent maybe less than 5% of investment, but majorities of investment on startup come from vertical, come from banking sector that they have their own venture capital arms, from material or even petrochemical sectors or food sectors. The company in Thailand start to acquire startup in Canada, in Silicon Valley, and also in Israel or even Europe, and then start to return home to invest in a bigger ticket size. We're starting from maybe couples of million US. Now we are talking about $500 million US for the ticket size for last year. And we already have unicorn. We had 3 unicorns last year, only last year, mainly from the collaboration between so-called big firm in Thailand and also banking sector that's invest in that startup company. So you can see that we start to have our international accelerator with big Thai company and also international. That's the first arena. The second one is on the roles of banking sector that already changed a lot. They are considered as one of the most innovative and fast changing traditional sector in Thailand or even in the region. So in that sense, we start to work closely with our large corporation and join hand with Ministry of Foreign Affairs from both countries. We start to work in a city level with Japan. We have a collaboration with Fukuoka City that happen to be the capital cities of startup for the Japanese policy, and also work with Osaka, mainly work with private sector in Osaka that transform area around the Japanese railway plot of land in the middle of Osaka city. So we have a lot of exchange for young minded and also startup to land in Japan and Japan to land in Thailand. So in that sense, you can see that we have two specific layer collaboration with Japan, government to government and city to city, through collaboration with corporate and investor. And last but not least, we have Startup Thailand under the umbrella of Innovation Thailand that mainly develop ecosystem in main city in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, in Bangkok, in Phuket, in EEC, so that people all around the world can land and utilize smart visa with us. And last one, we target to have 100 deep tech startup for next year. Now we already have 60 after the survey. We started to have more and more deep tech startup from university. That again, we have close collaboration with Japanese universities, especially in Tokyo Tech and also some city that we work for quite a long time. So this is the benefit that we work between so-called triple helix plus. You can see that this is a quadruple helix relationship between Thailand and Japan regarding to startup development.
Thank you, Pak. I was particularly interested in the uniqueness of Thailand as a startup hub. You know, investments diversifying. Startups are not just focused on digital, but you also have non-digital ventures. You also have support investment from big conglomerates, big corporates in the region. So it sounded to me very, very exciting. Maybe I move to the Philippines. Dr. Paco. The Philippines is known as home for active social entrepreneurs, especially. Actually, my wife is also a social entrepreneur. She's done projects and projects. So I'm personally also very familiar with the Philippines. But what is the role of startups in addressing various development issues? What kind of support are needed to accelerate their social impact?
Well, I've been doing venture capital investment in Southeast Asia for over 25 years now. And at the very beginning, venture capital went into companies like Smart Communications, which is now part of the PLDT group, which is tied with Salim in Indonesia. PLDT and Globe are the two remaining telecommunication companies in the Philippines. Smart became a big part of PLDT. In fact, it's probably bigger than the regular landline part now. But yeah, that was also venture capital backed at the beginning. And then during that period, infrastructure problems were like in not only in telecommunications, but also in other aspects of communications. So you have, at the time, my firm, I was with H&Q Asia Pacific, one of the first VCs in Asia. We invested in Pocket Bell. It was a pager device. And of course, eventually the internet companies happened, software services. These are various investments. We also, Japan is very tied to the Philippines in manufacturing. As you know, semiconductors is one of the biggest exports of the Philippines. We have been packaging chips for probably 4 or 5 decades now. And that's kind of one of the reasons I'm a PhD in semiconductors, because of that legacy. But now, today, the digital companies are dominating the interest of our venture capitalists in the Philippines. As you know, there's various examples. Gojek bought a company in the Philippines, Coins.ph. We have, of course, the very famous BPO industry in the Philippines, moving from manufacturing to call centers and business support. So a big company, TaskUs, was invested in by my friends from Navigar, and Blackstone now is an investor there, right? And it went public at maybe $5.5 billion valuation. So there are various companies like that. But it's interesting that you discuss the SDG goals, right? So social entrepreneurship is not really only about Facebook. People would argue that doing Facebook applications and things that I did in 2005, right? Doing silly games for, eventually, I guess we realize now that companies like the Cambridge Analytica group, right? They abused that information. There are more productive uses of information technology, and in the Philippines, are entrepreneurs, and some of them are in your boot camp now. They are in food, financial services, e-commerce. Other areas that are very, very exciting are, of course, like in Indonesia and Malaysia and others, education, a very important need nowadays, and health services as well. So these are areas where the social entrepreneurs are excited and interested in. But I think, like Rafiza alluded to, it is a challenge because the Philippines is very dominated by very strong conglomerates, very strong family businesses. And of course, their lobby in the government is also very strong. So there's a lot of protected industries and protected companies. And so to break into this, it's something difficult for Filipino entrepreneur and investor like me to talk about, but those are the real challenges of doing business in Southeast Asia. And I think it's more pronounced in the Philippines. So the things that you ask about, like what support is needed, I think it's interesting to get more investor support, not only from the dominant sources today, which would be, of course, the angel investors. We have that a lot in the Philippines, people who have made money, but typically they come from rich families as well, and they're connected to those family conglomerates. So, you know the outcome, right? And it's not optimal for the entrepreneur. So that's why I'm very excited to discuss here and meet people in the JICA network and the regional investor group, because I think there's a strong opportunity. In one of the slides that was shared to me by the McKinsey group and by JICA is that there is a white space for Series B, Series C for the later stage investor rounds, right? So I think some other Southeast Asian countries are like that. What I admire a lot about Indonesia, and I have to say that back in 97, 98, when I was helping my friends in H&Q Asia Pacific in Indonesia, it was sad, right? We had to vacate them. They were being attacked, and they had to escape Indonesia. So today, it's amazing that Indonesia has gotten its act together and is now the dominant winner in many of the digital enterprises. When back in 97, 98, we were wondering, will people invest here, right? But today, it's amazing. And one of the things that I think us in other Southeast Asian countries admire and hope will happen in our countries is that the wealth will be organized in a way that it will be invested professionally rather than by the incumbent conglomerates and the like, right? And that's what we admire about what happened in Indonesia. The Philippines, if you copy what Professor Bambang said, the Philippines should be 1/3 of all the success that Professor Bambang said. But from the investment amounts, clearly it's not, right? So clearly there's other things happening. We have a lot of smart people in my breakout. I'll talk about my friends who are much younger than me. They did what I did, but they're bringing back their artificial intelligence expertise from Stanford University, and they have raised $4 or $5 million. And so those things are happening. I just hope that when Series A, Series B has to come, they will get the money, right? So I think I'll stop there. It's been a little long, so I'll wait for the questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Paco. And we very much look forward to learning more in the coming breakout sessions on the Philippines. Last but not least, by the way, I love that there's been a lot of exciting conversation in the Zoom chat as well. We'd love to get questions from the audience later. So if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them here. While we wait for the questions to come in, Karim, so the Bangladesh, it has also been emerging as a startup hub these days. And the government has recently put a lot of emphasis on upgrading its ecosystem, startup ecosystem, including establishment of Startup Bangladesh, which is the venture capital fund of ICT Ministry. How has that outcome of those efforts has been like to this date? Are there any comparative advantages that Bangladesh can offer to startup investors from foreign countries?
Well, thank you, Taro. Just as I start to speak, I think the call to prayers are happening in the background. I hope I'm not being drowned out by that loud sound.
We hear you.
Okay. So as you have said, yes, the Bangladesh government, especially through the ICT ministry, they have been very active in the startup ecosystem in Bangladesh. Compared to the other 4 countries in this group, of course, I think Bangladesh is probably the smallest in terms of the startup ecosystem, size of the startup ecosystem. But recently, actually, it has gotten a lot of traction. Including venture capital funds, private equity funds, angel investment funds, and all that. I think cumulatively, there are more than 400 million that has been invested into the country already. And it's increasing. The growth is very phenomenal. We already have a unicorn in Bangladesh. Many of you may know bKash, which is the largest mobile financial service company in the country, which recently secured a $250 million funding from SoftBank of Japan. And its total valuation is nearing 2 billion. And there are few others like Pathao and ShopUp. They have also raised funds from Sequoia Capital or other big name venture capital funds at valuations exceeding several $100 million. So that's all happening. What we see is specifically from this particular project of the government, where I co-chaired the selection committee and chaired the performance monitoring committee, which is very similar to some of the government initiatives that Professor Bambang and Dr. Part1 and others have talked about. So we provide pre-seed grants. So these are not against equity. These are basically grants of up to 1 million taka, which is roughly $12,000. And so far from this project, we have disbursed funds to 236 startups. And as Harasan was saying, that JICA's focus is on startups that are not only on the financial potential of the company, but also impact potential of the startups. It's very interesting that the Startup Bangladesh, which is under the project called Innovation Entrepreneurship Design Academy, IDEA project. And there actually the focus is on 2 things: innovation and impact. What impact is going to have on the society and the economy. So most of the projects that we have funded, fall under like telehealth, then waste recycling, edutech. Of course, there are some innovative fintech and e-commerce companies also. But what we do try to avoid is just simply fund, copycat startups or, conventional e-commerce startups. We usually stay away from those because we believe that they can raise funds from the commercial market. So from the government, from this IDEA project, the focus has been on, as I said, innovation and impact. And so you might ask, what am I doing in that project? I'm from the private sector. This is a very unique design, this project that the government has done, where both the selection committee and the performance monitoring committee, 2 of the most important committees, these are actually run by private sector executives like myself. So they want to bring the private sector experience and the expertise in and make sure that this is run like a professional venture fund without any, influence from political quarters or let's say government. And that's how it has been so far. So it is absolutely fantastic. Just to give you the idea how good it is, out of the 236, globally, when you fund startups, you expect, 80 to 90% of them to fail. Whereas in Bangladesh, under this idea project, out of the 236 projects that we have funded, or 236 startups that we have funded, 90% are still active. It is amazing. Over the last 4 years, we've funded this 236, and 90% of them are still active. Maybe there's the gumption or the passion of the startup, sponsors, or maybe it's the selection process. I don't know what it is, but so far it's working. The other thing that I really want to bring to bear here is, even though, as I said, we got started late and compared to India and maybe compared to Indonesia or Malaysia, the total amount of funds that are coming in is probably quite paltry. But the country is a huge country. I mean, we are a country of 170 million people, and our middle class is rising rapidly. It's going to it already exceeds 50 million. It's going to exceed 100 million very soon. And we are already a low middle income country with a per capita income exceeding 2,000 already, and it's growing 6 to 8% a year every year. We haven't failed to grow in any year in the past 20 years, which is really the strength of our economy. Even during the COVID period, we managed a growth of 3 to 6% each of the last 2 years. So because of that, I think already, venture capital funds like Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, Pegasus Tech Ventures, Golden Gate Ventures from Singapore, and many others from Hong Kong and others, they're taking active interest. Actually, there are more than 60 such active, funds which are active in Bangladesh today. And I think it's going to grow exponentially from here. What we see as the biggest strength is that most of these startups are run by young people in their 20s and 30s, and they have no inhibitions. Older entrepreneurs like myself, I started Technohaven back 36 years ago. We always, were scared to compete with, let's say, India or Ireland or something. This young generation, they have no such fears. That's the beauty of this new generation of entrepreneurs. That's why I'm very, very hopeful that they will do great, and we will see many unicorns coming up in the next 5 years, and we'll see a lot of successful entrepreneurs, catering to innovations which make sense for our the uniqueness of our market. So that is going to be very important going forward. And the last thing that I want to the last thought that I want to leave you with is that after listening to all the others, the advantage of speaking last is that I could listen to all of you, and I really do see a lot of commonalities in all these markets, even though there are so many differences also. And I think we can leverage those commonalities and share our experiences, compare notes, and see how we can, make this ecosystems grow even faster, because we really can't wait for this newfangled entrepreneurs to take charge of the economy. Because for countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines to leapfrog to the ranks of a developing country, the contribution of these new entrepreneurs is absolutely essential. So I really want to thank JICA and McKinsey for taking this initiative, this Ninja initiative. I really love the name. We really like to move like ninjas, fast and agile, and make a mark on our economies as we grow together. Thank you, Taro.
Amazing momentum in Bangladesh, from Bangladesh. Thank you, Karim. So I'm starting to receive a few questions in my chat. maybe I ask this question to the entire group. So many of you mentioned social impact and investment returns. How would you balance them? How do you balance social outcomes versus investor returns? And I think this topic also relates to JICA's mission as well. So anyone would like to open up on this?
Yeah, maybe I can start
Sure.
to respond. Yeah, currently I'm the chairman of Telkom Indonesia Group, which is, of course, the major telecommunication company in Indonesia. And part of the Telkom Group, we have the venture called MDI. And to answer to one of the question in the chat, one of the criteria of MDI to invest in any startup is a combination, is exactly combination between the two. Number one is the social impact, and second one, of course, we are talking about the investment return, or in this case, on the potential future valuation. So by combining these two, then basically what we have to do first is to list the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. We have the 17 goals of them. And then we pick some of the goals that, let's say, very relevant for Indonesia, at least for now. And then after selecting those goals, then we try to combine with any, let's say, existing startup or any potential proposal that already submitted by, some of the younger entrepreneurs. And by having that kind of process, I believe, maybe not perfect, but at least we are trying to be as much as, ideal, close to the idea of combining the social impact with the, promising investment return, or at least in this case, on the potential future valuation. Hopefully this will help to answer the question from the chat.
Thank you, Professor Bambang. Rafiza, you also mentioned earlier that your organization tried to cover the opportunities that not necessarily private sector investors are interested in terms of just by measuring the investment returns.
Yeah.
How would you balance those two metrics? Do you have any process, quantitative criteria, etc.?
Yeah. So we have three metrics that we look, among others, three main criteria metrics, given that we play a role in more of a developmental with respect to technology. But indirectly, we also need to make sure that they are commercial viable. So the first one is definitely the number of jobs created. Secondly is the revenue growth. And thirdly is the follow-on funding by the startups that we support. So that, and then of course there are more qualitative aspects of it. What are the verticals? What are the top priority verticals? Especially during the pandemic, we see certain verticals that requires a little bit more support and intervention from the government side. So this is in respect of the food tech, i.e. agri-tech, logistics, health tech, and also ed tech. So those are what we call it. We look at priority. So if, say, for example, we have 20 startups that we have to pitch, we would give priority to those that the prioritization technology and those that are addressing a specific problem statements. And that's also the reason why earlier I said, and this is where the government support with respect to funding, where we match with the private sector, because we understand private sector's main priority is to look at the returns, commercial returns. And this is where we are able to de-risk, the private sector, and where we can also encourage and support the startups to look into more social impact that are commercial viable, which they on their own would probably be tough to manage. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you, Rafiza. We actually have about 8 minutes left. I actually have one question to the audience, because a lot of audience today come from Japanese investment firms. And I know that many of the Japanese investors are not necessarily familiar with the investment landscape opportunities in Southeast Asia. Are there any questions from the audience, especially the Japanese investors, any concerns or any myths that you have for the Southeast Asian region? Any question that you would like to ask to the panelists as well? You can shoot them in the chat. And while we wait for that, maybe Hara-san, has JICA received any questions like that on something they have, any questions, concerns, myths that they have regarding Southeast Asia? Have you come across any questions?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I don't have specific cases, but as I said earlier, we have been supporting the Japanese small and medium-sized industries to go abroad and to test their products and services in order to tackle the social issues. And yeah, well, there are successes and failures, I must say. And having these experiences and having listened to the panelists, I came across about maybe I'm diverting your question, but for the impact and investment return, what we have been in mind is that JICA may be able to support the, say, like measurement of impacts. I mean, whenever we are talking about the impacts, it's quite vague. But in the context of the impact investment or impact finance, it's very much increasingly necessary to make the measurement right and reporting right. So we do have vast experiences of project evaluation or the investment evaluation and reporting that we can provide to the startups as well as investors alike. That is one thing. Another thing is that having heard of the panelists' discussion today, I came to one conclusion that setting the environment right is quite important. And in all those 5 countries, I think it's fair to say that the government has been very much stable, and they're maintaining their kind of attitude towards business right and intact. And it reminds me of the East Asian miracle, which we discussed in the late 90s. So the government stability as well as the predictability of support to the private sector, especially to the startups, is quite necessary. Last thing is that we can provide good kind of cases, known to much wider public, including the investors in Japan. So this is part of our endeavor to highlight good successful cases in those 5 countries, known much wider to the Japanese investors and the businesses alike. These are the findings that I got through this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Hara-san. Maybe I ask the same question to Pak, given Thailand has been collaborating with Japanese companies for such a long period of time. Have you received any questions, concerns, myths from Japanese investors regarding investment opportunities in Thailand and other parts of Asia?
I think there are 2 specific areas that we have been working with Japanese counterpart for quite a long time. The first one is on the long-term commitment rather than key questions regarding to concern. Because when we we work with Japanese counterpart, we need to have a special arrangement. We have to have a dedicated manpower to work with Japanese counterpart in a very long time. Sometimes it took us more than 2 or 3 years on developing a project, or even you can call it as a pre-project preparation. So in that sense, I think this is a sign that we need to have a very strong commitment with Japanese counterpart. The second one is on the shift momentum from corporate investment to startup investment, which is very new. In the case of Japan, Japanese government already indicated that one specific KPI is to land Japanese startup in the area that's being a target, and one of the area is Southeast Asia. So in that sense, we incorporate with both Royal Thai Embassy and also Japanese Embassy in Bangkok on setting up event to so-called to match and to bridge between investor in Thailand and also in Japan. I think this is the emerging issues. And then certainly we have COVID-19 situation. Every so-called physical event or even physical meetup translate into all digital. So in that sense, I think we need to have more time to see more evidence that we can achieve this transformation, a transformation from corporate to corporate into investor to startup more and more.
Thank you. Dr. Pakul, was it you who raised your hand?
Yeah, I just think I made one of those mistakes in my youth, right? That I thought Southeast Asia were all similar, and then it would be easy to invest in one place and then hop and then do the same thing in Malaysia and then go to Singapore, and it would be the same thing, and then do it in Indonesia and the Philippines. Big mistake. It just didn't work out, right? Each one is different. You have regulations that are different. And the Philippines is actually one of those weird ones, right? Like we're like Hollywood in Southeast Asia. We're kind of different, all of us. So that to me is one of the myths that people might have, that we kind of look alike, but we're quite different.
Thank you. That's a very great point.
So it's important to have a local partner. It's one of my conclusions to the investors, right?
So being conscious of time, actually, this concludes our first panel discussion. Thank you so much again to the panelists for such a great insights, great comments, and thank you to the audience for the questions as well.